I was 42 years old when my job sent me on a routine assignment that should have lasted 5 days. 5 days. One hotel, one rental car, one schedule packed with meetings. Nothing about it felt unusual. I had traveled for work dozens of times before. Different cities, different conference rooms, different versions of the same conversations. I believed I knew exactly who I was. I believed I knew the life I had built. And I believed very confidently that nothing significant could still surprise me. I was wrong, because sometimes the biggest turning points in our lives don't arrive as dramatic moments. They arrive quietly, professionally, with an emailed itinerary and a boarding pass. And by the time you realize everything has changed, you're already standing in a life you never planned for. Before that trip, my life was stable in the way adulthood often is. Not exciting, not tragic, just established. I worked as a regional operations director for a national consulting firm based in the US. My role involved auditing branch performance, restructuring underperforming teams, and reporting directly to senior leadership. It was the kind of job people respect. When you say the title out loud, it paid well. It looked impressive. It came with expectations. I had been with the company for nearly 14 years. I was known as dependable, measured, professional. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room. I wasn't chasing promotions anymore. I was the person they trusted when something needed fixing. Quietly, at 42, I had reached that stage of life where ambition had softened into responsibility. I wasn't trying to prove myself. I was trying to maintain what I had built at home. Life followed predictable rhythms. I lived in a modest but well-kept townhouse. 2 cars in the driveway. A calendar full of obligations. By marriage was functional. That's the most honest word I can use. We weren't unhappy, but we weren't curious about each other anymore either. We shared logistics more than dreams, schedules more than conversations, responsibilities more than emotions. There were no major fights, no dramatic problems, just silence where passion used to live. And at the time, I told myself that was normal. Everyone says marriage settles. Everyone says routines replace excitement. Everyone says this is what adulthood looks like, so I accepted it. The email arrived on a Monday morning. Subject line: urgent, temporary assignment, Pacific Northwest region. I remember reading it while standing in my kitchen, coffee cooling on the counter. The company needed someone to oversee a short-term operational recovery project in a coastal city I had never visited before. A branch had lost senior leadership unexpectedly. Morale was low. Deadlines were slipping. They needed someone experienced, someone calm, someone trusted. They needed me. 5 days, possibly 7. Expenses covered. Hotel arranged. I replied yes, within 10 minutes. Not because I was eager, but because saying yes had become second nature. The flight was early. I sat by the window, watching the city shrink beneath the clouds. There's something about flying alone that strips life down to its essentials. No expectations, no conversations, just time. I remember thinking about nothing in particular: work, emails, a presentation I needed to revise. I did not think about transformation. I did not think about fate. I did not think about change. That's important, because the moment that alters your life rarely announces itself. The city greeted me with cold air and the smell of rain. It was quieter than I expected. Slower, older. The kind of place where people walked instead of rushed, where conversations felt less transactional. My hotel overlooked the water that first night. I stood at the window longer than necessary. Not because something was calling to me, but because, for the first time in a long while, nothing was demanding anything from me. No spouse, no staff, no expectations. Just space. The first day went exactly as planned. Meetings, introductions, carefully worded reassurances. I listened more than I spoke. The team was competent, but shaken. Leadership changes always leave invisible damage. I spent the day observing workflows, reviewing reports, and quietly taking notes. Nothing emotional, nothing personal. Or so I thought. It happened late in the afternoon. I stepped outside the building for air. That's when I noticed how quiet the city felt compared to my life back home. No honking, no rushing, no pressure to perform, just breathing room, and for reasons I still can't fully explain. I felt something loosen inside me. A thought surfaced uninvited. When was the last time I felt present? Not productive, not useful, present. I pushed the thought away. I was here to work. That evening, instead of ordering room service like I normally would, I walked. No destination, just movement. I ended up at a small restaurant by accident. Local, unpolished, warm. I ate alone. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely doing it. I didn't scroll my phone. I didn't check emails. I simply sat. That might sound insignificant, it WASN single quotes, because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can give a person is silence. Back in the hotel room, I lay awake longer than expected, not anxious, not stressed, just aware that my life had become extremely efficient and completely unexamined, aware that I had been moving forward on autopilot, aware that I hadn't questioned anything in a very long time. And somewhere between the sound of distant traffic and the rain against the window, a realization settled quietly in my chest. This trip was not going to stay professional, not in a scandalous way, not in a dramatic way, but in a deeply personal one. At the time, I still believed I would return home unchanged. I believed this assignment would end like all the others, with a report submitted and life resuming exactly as before. I didn't yet understand that sometimes a job doesn't take you somewhere new geographically, it takes you somewhere you've been avoiding internally. And this was only the beginning. When I landed in Tokyo that morning, I didn't yet understand how much my life was about to shift. At 42, I had traveled plenty for work, but nothing prepared me for the whirlwind ahead. The airport was vast and intimidating, a stream of people flowing in every direction. My suitcase rolled behind me like a loyal companion, though I barely noticed it. My mind was focused entirely on the assignment ahead, launching the new international logistics platform for my company. I had been promoted to project manager only 6 months prior, a milestone that felt like both a victory and a warning. My superiors expected results and fast. It wasn't just about overseeing spreadsheets or managing remote teams. It was about diplomacy, strategy, and reading people in a culture vastly different from my own. My first hotel room overlooked the neon skyline, and I remember thinking how surreal it all felt. I had dreamed of seeing Tokyo like any other tourist, but instead, I was here with a purpose and a pressure that weighed heavily on me. Emails pinged relentlessly on my phone, and I realized there would be no true downtime. My first meeting with the Japanese team was an experience I won't forget. The conference room was pristine, modern, and intimidatingly large. I stepped in, shaking hands politely, offering smiles I hoped conveyed confidence. At first, communication was straightforward, but soon I noticed the subtleties that travel guides never mention, the delicate balance of directness and politeness, the importance of hierarchy, the silent gestures that spoke volumes. A suggestion I thought was minor received long contemplative glances from the team. I realized I had to recalibrate my approach immediately. By the afternoon, it became clear that this wasn't just a standard project deployment. There were hidden agendas, internal rivalries, and expectations that weren't documented in any briefing email. Some of the senior staff seemed skeptical of an outsider, especially one who had only recently been promoted. I felt the familiar sting of imposter syndrome creeping in, a feeling I hadn't encountered in years, but that refused to leave quietly. I reminded myself I had been chosen for this project because of my track record, my skills, my adaptability. I was 42, yes, but that experience and perspective were my secret weapons. The real test came on the third night. After a long day of meetings and late-night strategy sessions, I returned to my hotel room exhausted. I intended only to rest, maybe skim through a few notes and prepare for the morning presentation. Then, my phone rang. It was my assistant back home in Atlanta, Amara. "There's a situation," she said. "You need to see this immediately." I logged into the company's internal portal and found a series of urgent notifications. A logistics partner in Europe had pulled out unexpectedly, jeopardizing the timeline of the entire rollout. Every contingency plan we had was now obsolete. Panic bubbled up inside me for a moment, but I forced it down. I spent the next 4 hours strategizing. I called contacts in multiple time zones, made back-to-back Zoom calls, and drafted urgent proposals. By the time I finally set my laptop aside, I realized my body had survived on adrenaline alone, and my mind was buzzing with calculations and contingency routes. I could feel exhaustion settling into my bones, but also a spark of something else: determination. This moment was pivotal. I realized that 42 wasn't too late to face something extraordinary. I realized that real-life challenges demanded resilience, creativity, and courage, the kind you only develop after years of experience. Over the next few weeks, I began to adapt. The team slowly warmed up to me as I demonstrated competence, patience, and respect for their culture. I began learning the nuances of negotiation, the art of listening more than speaking, and the subtle ways to influence outcomes without seeming domineering. I also discovered personal lessons I hadn't anticipated. Traveling alone in a foreign city, managing hypershare deadlines, and navigating cultural intricacies taught me humility and patience. It forced me to confront my fears, failure, rejection, and the possibility that I wasn't as indispensable as I had believed. But it also reminded me of my own strength. At 42, I had life experience, professional expertise, and emotional intelligence that a younger version of myself could only dream of. And that realization fueled me. By the 5th week, the project had grown far beyond its original scope. What was supposed to be a short-term assignment had evolved into a high-stakes multinational operation. Branch offices in Europe, Asia, and the US were all connected by fragile timings, incomplete data, and human resistance. Every decision had a ripple effect, and every ripple could turn into a wave. At first, the chaos unsettled me. I had always thrived on structured environments, predictable routines, and clear hierarchies. Now, those routines were gone. Every morning, I woke to a new problem: supply chain disruptions, miscommunications, team conflicts, unexpected regulatory hurdles. Each evening, I fell into bed, mentally replaying the day's negotiations, hoping I hadn't missed something crucial yet. Amid the pressure, something surprising happened. I started to thrive. The city around me, with its relentless pace, neon glow, and unfamiliar rhythms, forced me to see beyond my comfort zone. The people I worked with, skeptical at first, distant, polite, but guarded, began to open up. In meetings, I listened more than I spoke. But when I spoke, my words carried weight because they were grounded in experience and thoughtful observation. I realized that this job wasn't just asking me to solve problems, it was asking me to confront my own limitations. It happened during a critical morning meeting with a European partner whose cooperation was essential. They proposed a compromise that, if accepted, would have reduced the company's leverage and potentially compromised months of work. Everyone in the room expected the standard response: caution, hesitation, or deferral to higher management. I paused. I looked around the table and realized something. Fear was controlling the room. Fear of risk. Fear of upsetting the delicate balance. Fear of responsibility. And I realized something else. I wasn't afraid. I proposed a solution that carefully balanced their needs with ours, a solution that required courage, negotiation, and confidence. There was a moment of silence, almost unbearable, before heads slowly nodded in agreement. I could feel the shift in the room. Skepticism had turned into respect. Resistance had turned into collaboration. That moment marked the beginning of a personal transformation I hadn't expected. I was no longer just a manager executing tasks. I was a strategist, a negotiator, a problem solver operating at the edge of possibility. Outside of work, the city became a mirror of my internal journey. Walking alone at night, wandering through lantern-lit streets, I reflected on my life before this assignment. I realized how much I had been coasting, sticking to routines, avoiding discomfort, settling for efficiency over growth. My marriage, my home life, even my professional reputation had become comfortable patterns, not sources of genuine fulfillment. I started keeping a journal, not a work journal, but a personal one: thoughts, fears, insights, small observations about the people I met, the food I ate, the streets I walked. Writing became a kind of therapy, helping me untangle years of autopilot living. One evening, while sitting at a quiet cafe, I recognized a truth that startled me. I had spent decades believing that security and stability were the ultimate goals. But here, far from home, surrounded by unpredictability and responsibility, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I understood that growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from challenge, discomfort, and risk. And the earlier we embrace it, the more profound our transformation can be, regardless of age. During this period, I also formed unexpected connections. The team members I initially struggled to relate to became allies. I learned to navigate cultural differences, build trust, and inspire collaboration. I saw humility in action, patience as power, and resilience as a quiet form of leadership. In one conversation with a young project coordinator, she said something that stuck with me. "You don't just manage this project, you carry all of our confidence with you." At first, I felt the weight of the words. Then, slowly, I realized she was right. Leadership wasn't just about giving orders or checking boxes. It was about holding space for others to succeed. And holding that space transformed me. Professionally, yes, but personally too. I had begun to see myself not only as a capable leader, but as someone capable of deep courage, authenticity, and transformation. By the time the project began to stabilize, I understood something crucial. My life had shifted irrevocably. This job had taken me somewhere I never expected, not a new city, not a new company, but a new version of myself. And for the first time in years, I began to ask questions I had long avoided. Who am I beyond my title? What do I truly want from life, if not just efficiency and security? What risks am I willing to take to live authentically? These questions would follow me home, and I knew that returning to my old life would not be simple. By the 6th week of the assignment, the project had stabilized. The critical emergencies had been resolved, partnerships solidified, and the workflow smoothed into a rhythm that, for the first time, felt almost predictable. But for me, predictability no longer felt safe, or even desirable. I had changed, not dramatically, Not in ways that were obvious to everyone else, but in ways that mattered most. I had discovered that I could thrive under pressure, that I could connect deeply with people I didn't expect to, and that I could trust my own instincts. I had learned, quietly but profoundly, that my life up to this point had been a series of compromises and routines, not choices. And now, a choice had presented itself. It came unexpectedly during a late-night video call with senior leadership. My supervisor said, "Amara, we're impressed with your work here. The company is considering offering you a permanent overseas role. Leadership, strategy, and international operations, you've shown you can handle it. We think this could be your next step." I paused. My heart raced. I had never imagined myself leaving my city, my home, my routines, my marriage, my house. My life back in Atlanta of it felt like it had been built with certainty, security, and compromise. And yet, here I was, being handed an opportunity that promised challenge, growth, and transformation, a chance to step fully into the life I had been avoiding. I didn't say yes immediately. I didn't even say no. I just sat there, absorbing the weight of the moment. This wasn't about a promotion. It wasn't about salary or status. It was about whether I was willing to risk the life I knew for the life I could imagine that night. I walked along the waterfront near my hotel, the city's lights reflecting in the dark water. I replayed my life as I had known it, the predictable rhythms, the functional marriage, the comfort of routine, and I compared it to what was now possible: adventure, responsibility, autonomy, and an unknown that both terrified and exhilarated me. The truth hit me like the cold wind off the harbor. I couldn't have both. I could stay in the life I had meticulously built, safe and steady, or I could step into something completely unknown, something that might challenge every notion of who I was. For the first time in decades, I realized that my life had become a series of compromises disguised as stability. And stability, while safe, had made me small. I thought about my marriage not with resentment, but with clarity. We had grown apart, not out of malice, but because we had stopped choosing each other every day. We had stopped dreaming together. And now, a dream was being offered to me, one that I might not get again. I spent hours in my hotel room, staring at the ceiling. The city outside was alive, humming with possibility. I tried to imagine my old life in Atlanta, the quiet dinners, the autopilot conversations, the predictable routines, and then I imagined this new path: travel, challenge, responsibility, growth, and yes, loneliness. I realized that the choice wasn't about work, it was about life, about whether I was willing to risk comfort to discover who I truly was. I remembered the small moments from my trip, the quiet cafe, the long walks, the conversations with my team, the thrill of solving problems no one else could solve. I remembered how alive I had felt in uncertainty. The answer, when it came, was both terrifying and inevitable. I couldn't go back to the life I had left behind. Not unchanged after everything I had discovered about myself. The next morning, I called my supervisor. My voice was steady, even as my heart raced. "I want it," I said simply. That one sentence changed everything. It wasn't just a career decision. It was a declaration. I was choosing growth over comfort, challenge over complacency, transformation over routine. I was choosing myself fully, unapologetically, for the first time in years. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be sacrifices, loneliness, and moments of doubt. But I also knew I could no longer ignore the truth I had discovered in that city, walking its quiet streets, working with strangers, and confronting challenges I had never imagined. Life, I realized, doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait until we feel ready. Sometimes it simply hands us an opportunity, and we either step forward or step aside. I had chosen to step forward. Returning home after weeks abroad felt strange, almost surreal. The city I had lived in for decades, the streets I knew by heart, the routines I had followed on autopilot, they all seemed smaller somehow, quieter in the wrong way. I stepped off the plane in Atlanta and felt the familiar weight of home settle over me, but it wasn't comforting. It was constraining. I had changed, though the world around me hadn't, and that dissonance created a quiet, persistent tension in my chest. Walking into my townhouse, I noticed the small things first. The way the furniture hadn't moved. The calendar on the wall still marked with last month's obligations. The coffee mugs lined up neatly in the cabinet. Everything was exactly as I had left it, yet nothing felt right. My spouse greeted me with a polite hug, a practiced smile. Conversation started as it always did. Mundane, logistical, surface level. I tried to answer questions about the trip, about work, about how things were, but each response felt hollow. The person I had become, confident, tested, transformed, couldn't comfortably inhabit the life I had paused for so long. It was then I realized the truth. I had returned physically, but I had outgrown the life I had once known. Over the following days, the contrast became impossible to ignore. I tried to resume old routines, checking emails, managing local projects, planning dinner, yet everything felt smaller, slower, muted. I began to notice subtle frustrations rising in me, the silence of a home that no longer challenged me, the predictability of colleagues who hadn't seen the urgency I had faced abroad, the absence of purpose that had defined my weeks overseas. I tried to articulate it to my spouse. I feel different. I can't explain it fully. I've seen what I'm capable of. I can't go back to doing the same things I did before. The words were awkward, heavy, unfamiliar, and so was the silence that followed. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fights, no shouting matches, just quiet, deliberate awareness. I saw that our marriage had existed on routine, not curiosity. We had shared responsibilities, but not aspirations. And now, I was awake in a way I hadn't been for years, while my partner remained in a rhythm of familiarity. This realization was painful, not because of anger or betrayal, but because of clarity. I loved my spouse, but I could no longer live a life dictated by avoidance, comfort, or routine. I could no longer ignore the lessons I had learned overseas, the resilience, courage, and capacity for growth that had been waiting inside me all along. I began to understand that transformation is not something you can compartmentalize. You can't have a new self and an old life coexisting peacefully. One will demand dominance, and in my case, my transformation would not be ignored. Work at home was equally revealing. Colleagues long accustomed to my dependable, measured presence noticed subtle changes, the decisiveness, the assertiveness, the willingness to take calculated risks. Some admired it, others resisted it. Meetings that once felt routine now felt frustrating. Projects that had once inspired mild satisfaction now felt limiting. I realized the professional landscape I had returned to was no longer capable of holding the version of me I had discovered abroad. And so, I made another quiet decision. I would not shrink to fit my old life. I would not trade the lessons I had learned, the confidence I had gained. For the comfort of routine, I spent nights walking alone through familiar streets. The city unchanged, yet my perception irreversibly altered. I thought about the small cafe in Tokyo, the late-night meetings with skeptical teams, the moments of quiet clarity walking by the harbor. I realized that life does not pause to accommodate comfort. Life moves forward whether you are ready or not. And I realized something else. The life I had returned to was not wrong. It had served me. It had given me stability, predictability, and security. But it was no longer enough. I had been given a glimpse of what was possible and I could not ignore it. I understood then that true transformation is rarely sudden or dramatic. It is quiet, cumulative, and relentless. It reshapes your perspective, your choices, your relationships, and ultimately, your destiny. The weeks that followed were filled with adjustments. Conversations with family became more intentional. Work decisions became bolder. Even small daily routines were filtered through the lens of who I had become. Someone who had stepped into challenge, risk, and growth and refused to go back. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know exactly where this transformation would lead, but I understood one undeniable truth. I could never return to autopilot. I could never ignore the potential of my own life again. The city, the office, the home, they remained the same externally. But internally, I was standing in a world I had built through courage, awareness, and choice, a world I could no longer abandon. Returning home had been the first test. The next months would be the real journey. Not a single dramatic moment. Not a sudden revelation, just the slow, relentless reshaping of a life I had always taken for granted. I began each morning differently than before. No longer rushing to emails or obligations, I spent time reflecting, planning, and observing. Simple habits, walking through the neighborhood, journaling, reading, exercising took on a new weight. Each small choice became a declaration. I am conscious. I am present. I am alive. Work changed too. I no longer accepted good enough projects or passive assignments. I sought challenges, roles where I could solve real problems and grow. I started mentoring younger colleagues, offering guidance, not out of authority, but out of empathy. I realized that leadership isn't about position, it's about presence, influence, and courage. Slowly, the world responded. Colleagues noticed my confidence. Teams sought my counsel. Opportunities appeared that I hadn't chased, because I had learned that showing up fully often invites change naturally. The most profound shift was internal. The quiet cafe in Tokyo, the walks by the harbor, the late-night reflections, they had taught me that life isn't measured by comfort or routine, but by authenticity and courage. I began questioning long-held assumptions. What did I want from relationships? From work? From myself? I realized that my previous life, comfortable, efficient, predictable, had been defined by avoidance. Avoiding risk, avoiding discomfort, avoiding deep self-reflection. Now I didn't avoid, I embraced. I discovered joy in small, deliberate actions, trying new experiences, speaking openly about feelings, connecting with people fully, and pursuing professional opportunities that terrified me. I learned that growth is often uncomfortable, but the discomfort carries the reward. My marriage, once functional but distant, became a reflection of the transformation I had undergone. I had conversations I had long deferred, expressing needs, boundaries, and desires with honesty. Not every conversation was easy, not every outcome was neat, but authenticity replaced routine. I also built new relationships with colleagues, mentors, friends, even strangers, a broad card in curiosity, trust, and openness. I realized that life's richness is found in connections that challenge, inspire, and grow with you, not merely sustain you over time. I accepted the overseas position. It was challenging new cities, unfamiliar cultures, high stakes, but it also reaffirmed a truth I had discovered in Tokyo. Experience, courage, and authenticity are more powerful than age or title. I learned to navigate complex international teams, mediate conflicts, and drive projects with precision and empathy. Every challenge reinforced my belief that growth is cumulative. Small decisions, daily persistence, and intentional action create lasting transformation. I had achieved professional milestones I never imagined. Leading multi-country initiatives, mentoring emerging leaders, and influencing corporate strategy at the highest level. But more importantly, I had achieved personal clarity. Sitting one evening by a harbor in a city that once intimidated me, I thought back to the email that had started it, all the simple assignment I had accepted without hesitation. 5 days, one hotel, one schedule, that's all it was supposed to be. But it had been more than that. It had been a doorway, a subtle, quiet push that led me to confront comfort, fear, and complacency. It had taken me to a life I never expected, a life where challenges weren't obstacles, but invitations, where uncertainty wasn't frightening but liberating, and where growth was not something to hope for, but something to choose every single day. I realized that life doesn't always make dramatic announcements. Sometimes it arrives in emails, boarding passes, and late-night reflections. And sometimes, the most profound journeys are the ones we never planned to take. I had returned home changed, and in the process I had finally found the life I was capable of living, fully awake, fully present, and fully myself.